Tell me what blue looks like, whispered the 8-year-old boy, his sightless eyes staring into darkness. The homeless girl sitting beside him on the park bench had never been asked such an impossible question. What she did next would change not only his world, but break the heart of the billionaire father who had been watching from the shadows, a father who would soon discover that some lessons come too late, and some blindness can never be cured. Ethan Wellington pressed his small fingers against the cold metal of the park bench, feeling the rough texture beneath his palms. 2 years had passed since the car accident that stole his sight, but today felt different. Today, he had finally managed to slip away from Mrs. Henderson, his ever-watchful nanny. During their routine visit to Central Park, for the first time in months, he was alone without the suffocating presence of adults who spoke about him as if he weren't there. The autumn air carried the scent of dying leaves and distant hot dog vendors. Ethan could hear children laughing somewhere to his left, their voices mixing with the rhythmic squeaking of swings and the gentle splash of ducks in the pond. These sounds had become his world, a tapestry of audio that helped him navigate through days that felt increasingly empty despite living in a Manhattan penthouse worth $50 million. Are you lost too? A soft voice asked beside him. Ethan turned his head toward the sound. The voice belonged to a girl, probably around his age, with a slight rasp that suggested she had been crying recently. There was something comforting about her presence, something that made him feel less invisible than he usually did. I'm not lost, Ethan replied quietly. I just wanted to be somewhere where people don't whisper about me. The bench creaked as the girl shifted closer. What do they whisper about? That I'm broken, that I'll never be normal again. That my father spends millions on doctors who can't fix me. Ethan's voice carried a weariness that no 8-year-old should possess. My name is Ethan. I'm Amara, the girl said. And you're not broken. You're just different. Sometimes different is better. For the first time in weeks, Ethan smiled. How old are you, Amara? 9, but I feel older most days. There was something in her voice that suggested she understood loneliness in ways that few children ever should. Can I ask you something strange? Ethan nodded. Tell me what blue looks like. The question hung in the air between them, like a bridge neither of them was sure they could cross. Ethan had been asked many questions by doctors, therapists, and specialists. Questions about pain levels, light sensitivity, and mobility challenges. But no one had ever asked him to describe something he could no longer see. I can't see anymore, Ethan whispered, feeling the familiar sting of tears behind his closed eyelids. I used to know what blue looked like, but now I'm forgetting. Everything is getting darker in my memories. Amara was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice carried a gentle authority that seemed far beyond her years. Blue isn't something you see with your eyes, Ethan. Blue is what you feel when you're safe inside while it's raining outside. It's the sound of water hitting windows when you know you're protected. Blue is the feeling of being wrapped in your favorite blanket when the world feels too big and scary. Ethan sat perfectly still, processing her words. Something was happening inside his chest, a warm sensation he hadn't felt since before the accident. That's beautiful. How do you know that? Because I used to be blind too, Amara said softly. Not like you, but in a different way. When my family died in a car crash last year, I couldn't see anything good in the world for months. Everything looked gray and empty, even though my eyes worked fine. But then I learned that real seeing isn't about your eyes. It's about your heart. The revelation hit Ethan like a gentle wave. Here was someone who understood loss, who had experienced her own form of darkness and emerged with wisdom that no expensive therapist had ever shared with him. Can you tell me about other colors? Ethan asked, his voice filled with a curiosity that had been dormant for 2 years. Amara's voice brightened. Red is the feeling of being hugged when you're scared. It's warm and strong and makes your heart beat faster, but in a good way. Yellow is laughter, not just any laughter, but the kind that bubbles up from your stomach and makes your whole body shake with joy. Green is the smell of grass after it rains, when everything feels new and possible again. As Amara spoke, Ethan began to see colors in ways he had never imagined. Each description painted vivid emotional landscapes in his mind, creating a new visual vocabulary that had nothing to do with sight and everything to do with feeling. Purple, Amara continued, is the feeling of being special, like when someone chooses you first for their team or remembers your favorite song. Orange is excitement, like the moment before your birthday party when you can't sit still because something wonderful is about to happen. For the first time since the accident, Ethan laughed. Not the polite, careful laughter he had learned to produce for adults who were trying too hard to cheer him up, but real, genuine laughter that started in his belly and erupted like a geyser of pure joy. The sound of his son's laughter stopped Marcus Wellington in his tracks. The billionaire technology mogul had been standing behind a cluster of oak trees for the past 10 minutes, watching his son interact with a homeless girl whose clothes were 3 sizes too big and whose shoes had holes that revealed bare feet beneath. Marcus had initially approached to retrieve Ethan and scold Mrs. Henderson for her negligence, but something about the scene had made him pause. Marcus Wellington III was a man accustomed to control. At 42, he had built a technology empire worth $3 billion through meticulous planning, strategic thinking, and an unwavering belief that every problem had a solution if you threw enough money and expertise at it. But his son's blindness had shattered that worldview, leaving him feeling helpless and increasingly desperate. For 2 years, Marcus had consulted with the world's leading ophthalmologists, neurologists, and experimental medicine specialists. He had funded research initiatives at 3 major universities and had even explored controversial stem cell treatments in Switzerland. Nothing had worked. Nothing had brought back his son's sight or, more importantly, his son's spirit. Yet here, sitting on a park bench with a homeless child, Ethan was laughing with a freedom and joy that Marcus hadn't witnessed since before the accident. The irony was not lost on him. All his wealth and resources had failed to achieve what this street girl had accomplished in a matter of minutes. "What about Brown?" Ethan was asking, his voice animated in a way that made Marcus's chest tighten with both joy and something that felt uncomfortably like jealousy. "Brown is comfort," Amara replied without hesitation. "It's hot chocolate on a cold day, or the feeling of dirt between your fingers when you're planting something that will grow. Brown is also sadness sometimes, but the kind of sadness that helps you appreciate happiness when it comes back." Marcus found himself leaning forward, drawn into their conversation despite himself. This homeless child was articulating concepts about perception and emotion that his highly paid team of specialists had never touched upon. She was teaching his son to see through feeling, to understand that vision extended far beyond the physical act of sight. "Gray," Amara continued, "is the color of waiting. It's not good or bad, it's just the space between other feelings. Like when you're not happy but you're not sad either, you're just existing. Sometimes gray is peaceful, and sometimes it's lonely." "I think I lived in gray for a long time," Ethan said quietly. "Until today." The simple statement hit Marcus like a physical blow. His son had been existing in an emotional gray zone for 2 years, and Marcus had been too focused on medical solutions to notice the psychological and spiritual healing that Ethan desperately needed. "White," Amara said, her voice taking on a reverent tone, "is hope. It's the feeling that tomorrow might be better than today, even when you don't have any real reason to believe it. White is also love, not the grabby kind of love that wants to own you, but the kind that wants you to be happy even if it means letting you go." Marcus felt tears stinging his eyes. When was the last time he had let Ethan simply be happy without trying to fix, improve, or manage his condition? When had he last shown his son the kind of love that Amara was describing, love that prioritized the child's emotional well-being over his own need to control the situation? "Black," Amara said finally, "isn't scary like people think. Black is rest. It's the feeling of closing your eyes when you're really tired and knowing that sleep will make everything better. Black is also mystery, all the beautiful things that exist but haven't been discovered yet." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this new understanding of the color that had become his constant companion. "I always thought black was my enemy," he said softly. "But maybe it's just been trying to teach me something." "What do you think it's been trying to teach you?" Amara asked. "That there are other ways to see. That maybe losing my sight wasn't just about what I lost, but about what I could find instead." The wisdom in his son's words left Marcus struggling to breathe normally. In the space of 30 minutes, this homeless girl had given Ethan insights that 2 years of expensive therapy had failed to provide. She had transformed his understanding of his disability from a tragedy into a different kind of gift. But as Marcus watched them together, he also felt a growing unease. Who was this child? Where had she come from? What did she want from his son? His instincts as a protective father warred with his gratitude for what she had given Ethan. "Amara," Ethan said suddenly, "I want to show you something." The boy reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small device, voice recorder that his previous therapist had given him to help process his emotions. Marcus watched as Ethan fumbled with the buttons, his muscle memory guiding him through the process. "I've been recording things," Ethan explained. "Sounds, thoughts, feelings. But I never knew how to describe what I was feeling until you taught me about colors. Listen to this." Ethan pressed play, and the sound of rain filled the small space around the bench. But it wasn't just rain, it was rain mixed with his own breathing, with the sound of pages turning, with the distant hum of traffic. It was an audio painting of a moment in time. "This was last week during the storm," Ethan said. "I was in my room, listening to the rain, and I felt something, but I couldn't name it. Now I know I was feeling blue. I was safe inside while the world was wild outside." Amara listened intently, her head tilted slightly, as if she could see the scene Ethan was describing. "That's the most beautiful blue I've ever heard," she said. The simple exchange broke something open in Marcus's chest. His son was an artist, a poet, a philosopher, but Marcus had been so focused on the disability that he had missed the ability. Ethan had developed a heightened sensitivity to sound, emotion, and metaphor that was extraordinary. But Marcus had been too busy trying to restore his son's sight to appreciate the new forms of perception that had emerged. That was the moment Marcus made his decision. He stepped out from behind the trees and approached the bench, his expensive Italian shoes clicking against the concrete path. Both children turned toward the sound. Ethan with recognition and Amara with the wariness of someone who had learned to fear adults in expensive clothes. "Ethan," Marcus said, his voice carefully controlled. "Mrs. Henderson is looking for you." "Dad?" Ethan's face lit up with an expression Marcus hadn't seen in months. "Dad, this is Amara. She's been teaching me how to see colors with my heart instead of my eyes. She's amazing." Marcus looked at the homeless girl properly for the first time. She was too thin, with dark skin and intelligent eyes that seemed to hold more wisdom and pain than any child should possess. Her clothes were clean but worn, and she sat with the careful posture of someone who had learned to make herself small in a world that often wished she would disappear entirely. "Hello, Amara," Marcus said, his voice softer than he had intended. "Hello, sir," Amara replied, already starting to stand. "I was just leaving. I didn't mean to bother anyone." "No!" Ethan reached out, his hand finding Amara's arm. "Dad, she wasn't bothering me. She was helping me. She was teaching me things that all those doctors never could." Marcus looked between his son and this homeless child, seeing something in their connection that made his chest tighten with emotions he couldn't quite name. There was a purity in their friendship, an understanding that transcended their vastly different circumstances. "Amara," Marcus said carefully, "would you like to come have dinner with us? I think Ethan would enjoy showing you his room, and we could talk more about these colors." Both children's faces lit up, but Amara's expression quickly shifted to suspicion. "Why?" she asked simply. The directness of the question caught Marcus off guard. Why was he inviting this stranger into his home? Was it gratitude for what she had given Ethan? Guilt over their respective circumstances? A genuine desire to help? Or something more complex, a recognition that this child possessed something his money couldn't buy? "Because," Marcus said finally, "my son is happy for the first time in 2 years, and I think that has something to do with you." Amara studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to read his intentions. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, but just for tonight." As they walked toward Marcus's waiting car, Ethan chattering excitedly about all the sounds he wanted to show Amara in their apartment, Marcus felt a strange mixture of hope and apprehension. This homeless girl had unlocked something in his son that millions of dollars in medical treatment had failed to reach. But what would happen when reality intruded? What would happen when the differences in their worlds became impossible to ignore? The ride to the Wellington penthouse was filled with Ethan's excited chatter as he described his sound collection to Amara. He told her about the recordings he had made of different rooms in their apartment, how each space had its own acoustic signature, its own emotional color. "The kitchen is orange," Ethan explained. "It's always busy and warm, with sounds layering on top of each other, the coffee machine, the refrigerator humming, footsteps on tile. But my room is more purple. It's quiet but special, like a secret." Amara listened with complete attention, asking questions that showed she understood not just what Ethan was saying, but why it mattered to him. Marcus found himself studying her in the rearview mirror, trying to understand how someone so young could possess such emotional intelligence. When they arrived at the Wellington building, Marcus watched Amara's reaction to the marble lobby, the uniformed doorman, the gold-plated elevator buttons. Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't comment. Instead, she kept her attention focused on Ethan, helping him navigate the familiar space while continuing their conversation about sensory perception. The penthouse apartment was a masterpiece of modern design floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Central Park. Artwork worth more than most people's homes, furniture that belonged in a museum. But as they entered, Marcus saw it through Amara's eyes and felt an unexpected wave of discomfort at the ostentatiousness of it all. "This is my room," Ethan announced, leading Amara down the hallway to a space that had been specially modified for his needs. Textured strips along the walls helped him navigate, and his furniture was arranged in precise patterns that he had memorized. But the most remarkable feature was his collection of recording equipment, professional-grade microphones, a mixing board, speakers positioned throughout the room. "Oh my," Amara breathed, running her fingers along one of the microphones. "This is incredible, Ethan." "My dad got it for me after the accident," Ethan explained. "He thought it might help me with therapy. I don't think he realized I'd start making art with it instead." Marcus felt a sharp pang of recognition. He had purchased the equipment hoping it would serve a rehabilitative purpose, never imagining that Ethan would transform it into a creative outlet. Once again, he had underestimated his son's capacity for adaptation and growth. Over the next hour, Ethan played various recordings for Amara, each one a sonic snapshot of a different emotion or experience. There were recordings of thunderstorms and quiet mornings, of conversations in restaurants and solo moments in empty rooms. Together, they created an auditory autobiography of Ethan's life since losing his sight. "This one is my favorite," Ethan said, playing a recording that seemed to capture the sound of absolutely nothing until you listened carefully and realized it was filled with subtle textures, breathing, fabric rustling, the distant hum of city life through thick windows. "What color is this one?" Amara asked. Ethan thought for a moment. "It used to be gray, but now I think it might be white. It's the sound of waiting for something good to happen." As Marcus listened from the doorway, he realized that his son had been documenting his journey through grief and adaptation without any adult guidance or intervention. The recordings told the story of a child learning to find beauty in a world that had been fundamentally altered, creating art from the raw materials of loss and resilience. During dinner, Marcus found himself watching Amara carefully. She ate with the careful efficiency of someone who had known hunger, finishing everything on her plate and politely declining seconds despite obvious desire for more food. She answered Marcus's gentle questions about her background, with measured responses that revealed little while seeming cooperative. She had been living on the streets for 8 months since aging out of a foster care system that had failed her after her family's death. She attended school sporadically when she could find somewhere to clean up and wash her clothes. She slept in different places, sometimes shelters when space was available, sometimes doorways or park benches when it wasn't. The casual way she described her circumstances horrified Marcus, but what struck him most was her complete lack of self-pity. She spoke about her situation as if it were simply a set of facts to be managed, rather than a tragedy to be mourned. That night, after Amara had showered and borrowed clothes from Ethan's closet, the three of them sat in the living room while she continued Ethan's education in emotional color theory. She told them about gold, which was the feeling of being proud of yourself for doing something difficult. About silver, which was the sound of laughter mixing with tears. As the evening progressed, Marcus found himself drawn into their conversation, adding his own interpretations and memories to their collective understanding of how emotions could be experienced as colors. For the first time since the accident, they felt like a family engaged in something meaningful together. But as they prepared for bed, Marcus noticed something concerning about Ethan. His son seemed more tired than usual, and there was a pale quality to his skin that made Marcus feel uneasy. Ethan had been born with a rare heart condition that had been stable for years, but stress and excitement could sometimes trigger episodes. "Are you feeling all right?" Marcus asked as he helped Ethan into his pajamas. "I'm perfect, Dad," Ethan replied, but his breathing seemed slightly labored. "Today was the best day I've had since the accident. Amara helped me remember how to be happy." Marcus tucked his son into bed, listening to the sound of his breathing and making a mental note to monitor him closely. Ethan's heart condition was manageable with proper care, but it required constant vigilance. The next morning, Marcus woke to the sound of laughter coming from Ethan's room. He found his son and Amara sitting on the floor, working with the recording equipment to capture different sounds around the apartment. They had already recorded the coffee machine brewing, the elevator arriving at their floor, and the sound of pigeons on the balcony. "Dad," Ethan called excitedly, "we're making a color symphony. Each sound represents a different color, and we're mixing them together to create feelings." Marcus watched them work, marveling at how naturally they collaborated despite their vastly different backgrounds. Amara seemed to understand Ethan's technical equipment intuitively, while Ethan guided her through his emotional color system with the enthusiasm of someone sharing a beloved secret. But as the morning progressed, Marcus noticed that Ethan was growing increasingly pale and seemed to be having difficulty catching his breath. The excitement and emotional intensity of the past 24 hours might have been too much for his fragile heart. "Ethan," Marcus said carefully, "maybe you should rest for a while." "I'm fine, Dad," Ethan insisted, but even as he spoke, he swayed slightly and had to catch himself on the edge of his desk. Amara noticed immediately. "Ethan, are you okay?" "Just tired," Ethan mumbled, but his voice sounded weak and distant. Marcus felt panic rising in his chest as he recognized the signs of one of Ethan's cardiac episodes. His son's lips were beginning to take on a bluish tint, and his breathing was becoming increasingly labored. "We need to get you to the hospital," Marcus said, already reaching for his phone to call their driver. "No," Ethan said weakly, "I don't want to go to the hospital. I want to stay here with Amara." But even as he protested, Ethan collapsed onto his bed, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. Marcus called 911 while gathering the medications that Ethan's cardiologist had prescribed for emergencies. The ambulance arrived within minutes, and Marcus found himself in the familiar nightmare of watching his son being loaded onto a stretcher while paramedics worked to stabilize his condition. Throughout the chaos, Ethan kept asking for Amara, reaching out his hand as if trying to find her. "I'm here," Amara said, taking his hand and walking alongside the stretcher as they moved toward the elevator. "I'm right here." At the hospital, Marcus paced the waiting room while doctors worked to stabilize Ethan's condition. Amara sat quietly in one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs, still wearing Ethan's oversized clothes, looking lost and scared in the sterile medical environment. After 3 hours, Dr. Sarah Chun, Ethan's cardiologist, emerged from the emergency room with an expression that made Marcus's stomach drop. "How is he?" Marcus asked immediately. Dr. Chen sat down across from them, her expression grave. "Ethan's condition has deteriorated significantly. The excitement and emotional stress of the past day triggered a major cardiac event. His heart is failing, and we're doing everything we can to stabilize him." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "What does that mean? What are his chances?" "We're going to do everything possible," Dr. Chun said carefully. "But you should prepare yourself for the possibility that this might be very serious. He's asking for both of you." Marcus felt the world tilt around him as they were led into Ethan's room. His son looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, connected to monitors and 4 lines, but his eyes were alert and focused on the door as they entered. "Dad," Ethan said weakly. "Amara, I'm scared." Marcus took one of his son's hands while Amara took the other, both of them trying to hide their own fear behind encouraging smiles. Over the next several hours, Ethan drifted in and out of consciousness while Marcus and Amara maintained their vigil beside his bed. During his lucid moments, Ethan talked about colors and sounds, about the recordings he wanted to make, and the things he wanted to remember. "Amara," he said during one of these moments, "will you describe one more color for me?" "Which one?" Amara asked, tears streaming down her face. "Peace," Ethan whispered. "What color is peace?" Amara thought for a long moment. "Peace is clear," she said finally, "like looking through water when it's perfectly still. It's not exactly a color, it's the feeling of all colors being exactly where they belong." Ethan smiled, an expression of profound contentment crossing his features. "I can see it," he said softly. "I can see peace." As evening approached, Ethan's condition continued to deteriorate despite the medical team's best efforts. Marcus found himself holding his son's hand while watching the monitors that measured his failing heartbeat, feeling helpless in a way that all his wealth and resources couldn't change. "Dad," Ethan said suddenly, his voice barely audible. "I need to tell you something. In my pocket there's a note I wrote. For you." With trembling hands, Marcus reached into Ethan's jacket, which had been hanging in the room's small closet. In the pocket, he found a piece of paper covered in braille, and beside it, a handwritten translation in Ethan's careful script. Marcus read the note silently first, his eyes filling with tears as he absorbed his son's final message. Then, at Ethan's request, he read it aloud. "Dad, my eyes may be blind, but Amara brought colors to my life. I can see now, really see all the beautiful things I missed when I was trying so hard to see with my eyes. I can see love and friendship and how sounds can paint pictures and how feelings have colors. You're still blind, Dad, because you only see with money and worry. But maybe now you can learn to see with your heart like I did. Don't be sad that I'm leaving. Be happy that I learned how to see before I went. Love, Ethan." The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of the cardiac monitor. Ethan squeezed both Marcus's and Amara's hands, his breathing becoming increasingly labored. "Thank you," he whispered to Amara, "for teaching me how to see colors. For being my friend. For making me happy. Thank you," he said to Marcus, "for being my dad. For trying so hard to help me. For loving me even when you didn't understand me." As the sun set outside the hospital window, Ethan Wellington closed his eyes for the final time, his last breath leaving his body as quietly as a whisper. The cardiac monitor's steady beeping transformed into a single sustained tone that seemed to echo through the room like a final note in an unfinished symphony. Marcus collapsed into the chair beside the bed, his body racked with sobs that seemed to come from some place deeper than grief. 8 years of fatherhood, 2 years of desperate attempts to heal his son's blindness, and in the end, he had been powerless to save the one person who mattered most to him. Amara stood quietly beside the bed, tears streaming down her face as she continued to hold Ethan's still hand. "He could see," she said softly. "At the end, he could really see." The funeral was held 3 days later at a private cemetery in Westchester County. Marcus had spared no expense, but as the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Marcus realized that Amara was nowhere to be found. She had been beside him during the service, but sometime during the final prayers, she had simply vanished. Marcus spent the next week searching for her. He hired private investigators, contacted homeless shelters, checked with social services, and even returned to the park where Ethan had first met her. But Amara had disappeared as completely as if she had never existed. Months passed. Marcus returned to work, but found that his passion for building his technology empire had evaporated entirely. The penthouse apartment, once a symbol of his success, now felt like a mausoleum filled with expensive objects that had no emotional significance. He kept Ethan's room exactly as it had been, visiting it daily to listen to the recordings and read the note his son had left behind. The words haunted him. "You're still blind, Dad, because you only see with money and worry." Marcus had spent his entire adult life accumulating wealth and power, believing that these things would provide security and happiness for his family. But in the end, a homeless 9-year-old girl had given his son something that all his billions couldn't buy: the ability to see beauty and meaning in a world that had been fundamentally altered by loss. As winter settled over Manhattan, Marcus found himself returning to Central Park. Sitting on the same bench where Ethan had met Amara, he would sit there for hours, listening to the sounds that had become his son's new language, trying to learn how to see the world through emotion rather than sight. But the lesson had come too late. Marcus had all the money in the world, but he had lost the only thing that truly mattered. Amara had vanished back into the streets she came from, carrying with her the memory of a boy who had learned to see with his heart. And Marcus was left alone with his wealth and his regret, finally understanding what his son had tried to teach him about blindness, but with no one left to share that understanding with.